Sports RPGs are one of those genre combinations that feel like they shouldn't work, but then you play one and it makes so much sense. Striving to become better at a sport is reflected perfectly in the grind to level up in an RPG, and when you replace typical RPG battles with sports gameplay, you get something truly unique and engaging. The example many people might think of to represent this genre would be the Mario Golf and Mario Tennis games developed by Camelot for the Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance. However, since the release of Mario Tennis Power Tour in 2005, there was a long stretch of time with barely any other sports RPGs releasing. This often neglected genre is finally getting some love in modern times with the release of games like Golf Story, Pyre, and what we're here to talk about today, Dodgeball Academia. Dodgeball Academia instantly sets itself apart from those other sports RPGs I mentioned though, because they kind of cover more conventional sports for their gameplay. I mean, there really hasn't been a popular game that did dodgeball gameplay well since Super Dodgeball in the late 80s. That is, unless of course you count the classic hidden gem Pirates vs. Ninjas Dodgeball from 2008. Thrilling. But no, really, it's so cool to see the developers of Dodgeball Academia, Pocket Trap, take on making an awesome modern dodgeball game, and for the most part, they totally nailed it. The gameplay reminds me of arcadey sports games like Windjammers, but instead of just having the pure action of those kinds of games, Dodgeball Academia puts a nice twist on things by also having a strategic side to its gameplay. This shows in the whole RPG aspect to it, where you slowly build up a party where every character plays super differently and their different strengths and weaknesses synergize in interesting ways when combined. And then there's also other really well done RPG stuff like the tons of equipment that helps you further customize your playstyle. There's also strategy on the fly in the action in terms of positioning your team to best work together and timing your shots to catch your opponents off guard. One element that really added depth to this was how you charged up your super moves, which this game calls balltimate moves. They really only charge up substantially when you either catch the balls thrown at you, which requires a tight timing, or by taking the risk of holding the charge button when the enemy team has a ball on their side of the court. The risk-reward dynamic here is perfectly done, and I ended up finding myself developing interesting strategies around this intuitively without the game really needing to explain them. Like for example, if you're trying to build up a balltimate move through holding the charge button, you can take control of all the balls on the court and then throw one and instantly charge up, knowing you'll have a few seconds before the enemy can really threaten to throw it back. And that's just one of the really basic strategies. Like over the course of the game, new twists on the gameplay like different types of dodgeballs, different status effects, and slightly different rules to the game keep the game fresh and full of new ways to strategize. One of my favorite examples is the knockout mode, where when one member of a team loses all their health, they get sent behind the opposing team's side of the court. And this opens up a whole wealth of new strategies where you can pass the ball to an out player and then throw off your opponent by making them have to dodge balls coming from two directions at once. It introduces this super interesting dynamic where you actually don't want to fully knock out players on the enemy side of the field because having them behind you is so dangerous. However, the enemy AI knows this, and so the weaker players will try to act like a shield so they get knocked out before the star player, making the fight much harder. You'll find yourself trying to whittle down each member of the opposite team to low health before you even go for the knockout on any individual, but having their whole team in play like this also presents its own challenge too. All of this strategy fits in seamlessly to the smooth core mechanics of dodging, throwing, and catching to make for some of the most fun I've ever had with any sports or RPG gameplay system. Okay, so they nailed the gameplay, but this is an RPG, so it's also gotta have a good story to keep things engaging and to not just feel like an endless string of battles, right? So, while I will say the story of the main character Otto attending the Dodgeball Academy and making friends and growing together with them is good and entertaining overall, I do have to admit it's kind of a mixed bag with some flaws in there for sure. Like, the characters are amazing, they all have striking visual designs and personalities, and the dialogue is so funny. However, the gameplay scenarios propping up this great dialogue are where the cracks start to show. This is because almost all the missions are pretty much running back and forth to waypoints that trigger cutscenes that then trigger battles. The game gets away with this for the most part because of its genuinely hilarious characters and situations, but even that starts to get a little stale by the end of it because the game doesn't execute the rivalry relationships all that impactfully, so you don't get these big emotional clashes that would have gave the story a bit more oomph. Yeah, so when you combine that with the fact that pretty much every mission is just running back and forth, talking and battling, the missions start getting a little tiring by the end. To spice things up, there are a few instances in missions where there are special challenge modes or little mini games to provide variety, but the game really needed either a bunch more of those little mini games, or maybe just a bit more going on in the main missions to make the world traversal from point to point a bit more interesting. The weird part of it is that simply moving from point to point does feel great. Like, the world movement and platforming mechanics are incredible, but unfortunately there's only like one area in the whole game that uses them to their fullest potential, Mount Doji. And I gotta say, that was by far my favorite part of the game. Rolling and jumping my way to reach the peak was so awesome, and it gave me hope that maybe one day they'll make a sequel that can greatly expand on the platforming, cause the core mechanics here are already awesome. They really just needed more environments that used them like Mount Doji did. Honestly, just expanding the platforming probably would have added that perfect amount of much needed variety for me. Like, I think that's a big part of why games like Paper Mario work. So yeah, the game is definitely in need of some mission variety, but that's kind of par for the course for a lot of RPGs, right? There's just like 500 battles all strung together by different excuses to go to new areas. Well, I think for a lot of people, Dodgeball Academia won't really be able to get away with this in the same way an RPG more focused on battles can, since Dodgeball Academia isn't really able to be this grand, high-stakes adventure, and the comparatively small world map doesn't have that same sense of discovery. But honestly, a lot of that was kind of fine by me because of all the other strengths Dodgeball Academia has. With sports stories, you really get to focus the story pretty solely on the characters and the themes of their growth, and Dodgeball Academia mostly does a great job with that. And because their nature, sports stories like this tend to take place in less varied environments than a typical RPG, but the smaller scale of the setting doesn't have to inherently be a hindrance, really. Like, I loved how well I got to know the school grounds, and it was so fun finding all the secrets hidden around, some even being hidden intentionally out of bounds. The world is definitely dense enough with details like that and fun things to do to sustain the game for most of its run. Although I do admit I would've liked if they cut out a couple hours of what felt like padding in the missions, where you're just backtracking to areas you've already been to a dozen times to talk for a few seconds and then do a battle without progressing the story or characters all that much. And really, if the pacing was just a little tighter here, this game would've moved from an A to an S tier for me. It's kind of funny to say that though, because the game is still pretty short for an RPG, clocking in at only around 10 hours if you avoid most of the optional encounters like I did. Like, I simultaneously wanted the game to go on longer because of how fun the core gameplay was, and to be shorter and tighter paced because of how often the locations were being reused. The only way to really make this work would have been to have a few more new environments and examples of gameplay variety, but it's understandable that they couldn't do this because they didn't have a huge budget, and to be fair, what they did pull off here is still incredible. So yeah, even though I did have some problems with the story and mission structure, I often kind of let that go in favor of falling in love with all these little touches that the game really nailed. For instance, right off the bat, the game doesn't over-tutorialize and is quick to get you into the action. Like, it's a pretty simple story. It knows it doesn't need a dialogue-heavy intro setup to get you invested. Dodgeball Academia instead opts for what I think is a much stronger approach by quickly tying in the gameplay into expressing the most important parts of the characters and story. My favorite example is how they established the main threat of the first half of the game, Boris, by letting you play as him in the first match of the game to clearly show the power difference between you and him. Seeing how overpowered he is firsthand makes him feel more like a real obstacle, and at the same time it becomes something to strive for because you know eventually you'll get that strong too. Then there's also stuff like how all the personalities of the characters are reflected in their playstyles and special powers. Like, the main character Otto is a driven, hot-headed leader, so his special dodgeball powers are all fire-based. Or take Balloony, who's a timid guy who relies on others, so they play as a support healer. The personality of the characters is even further expressed through the text animations, which are done really well. There's an automated element here that puts in pauses and stuff at certain parts of the writing, but a lot of this had to be done by hand, and it's super impressive just how many of these moments there are. It really adds personality to the dialogue, which already was strong in its own right. One of my favorite bits of the dialogue was the few really funny anti-capitalist moments where the lunch lady starts price gouging you. Speaking of the lunch lady, the food in this game is what's used for healing items, and they have this little touch here that I really haven't seen in any other RPG. Each type of food works better or worse on certain characters depending on how much they like that food, and some items can't be eaten at all by characters because they're allergic. It's funny, cute, and a good gameplay element. There's also food that permanently boosts your stats, which allows you to really shape your character how you want. And that's not the most unique thing, but I just love permanent stat boost items in RPGs so much, and there's like a ton of them in this game, and there's just something about them that sends dopamine straight to the core of my one brain cell. Other RPG elements that really buttered my biscuit were all the good quality of life things I like to see in modern RPGs. Like how your party members still gain XP when they're dead at the end of battle, and party members not even in the battle still gain XP. This makes it so every character stays viable throughout the whole game without needing to grind them up individually, which I think is just always better. Another thing that stayed viable was all the equipment items, because a lot of their strengths and weaknesses weren't just straight stat buffs for the most part. I always prefer this kind of thing because when you get new equipment, you want it to change the gameplay more than just making you more powerful in one stat. And then there's things I liked about the challenge level, like, well, first of all, it's totally customizable how much damage you take and receive, so you can fine-tune the challenge in that sense to be to your taste in the options menu. But even if you don't want to change that at all, you'll still find nice balance to the challenge and the nice touches like how when you die, you always get the option to restart the battle or load from the last autosave. And the last option is great because this game autosaves like every 30 seconds. So I never found myself needing to redo a single extra battle when loading from an autosave, and therefore I never found myself feeling all that frustrated when I lost a battle. Another thing that eased frustration is that you can fast forward through any dialogue you want, and you can even stop fast forwarding at any point if you decide you actually do want to see the rest of the cutscene. And speaking of those dialogue options, this game has something I've never seen before, which is a language learners mode. The game has a good bundle of languages it's translated into, and when you're in language learners mode, you can toggle between those languages at the press of a button to help you learn a language while you're playing the game. I was particularly impressed by this because when I was trying to learn German, I was playing games in German to help learn, and I would have loved to have this feature. It's something I really hope to see in more future games. Man, those sound effects for the dialogue are really well done too, huh? Matter of fact, all the sound design and sound effects in this game are great, like the thwack when you run into a wall while rolling, or the thwack when you hit someone with a combo of throws. I think I just like thwacks. Okay, but no, really, the sound plays a big part in helping sell the cartoony style that adds so much charm to Dodgeball Academia. That cartoony style definitely takes a lot of influence from Cartoon Network shows like Amazing World of Gumball or Steven Universe for its 2D elements. The characters really pop on the screen, and a lot of that is accentuated by the fact that these 2D characters are dropped into really bold and stylish 3D environments. I love how a handful of modern games are embracing that Paper Mario 2D characters in a 3D environment style. Ever since the release of Here Comes Nico, I've started to see a decent amount more of these kinds of games cropping up, and I think it can really look good when done right like it is here. So yeah, they nailed the art, and when you top that all off with a great soundtrack that excels in the chiller moments, you've got a really amazing aesthetic on your hands. So yeah, there's really a lot to love in Dodgeball Academia, and only a handful of things to nitpick. Overall, this is kind of the best sports RPG straight up in my opinion, and it gives me high hopes for the genre as a whole, as well as for the future of Pocket Tribe Studios. I mean, this is just their second major release, so if Dodgeball Academia gets the attention it really deserves, I'd love to see what they can do next time around with a bigger budget. Anyways, this game is literally on every platform and not that hard to run on PC, so everyone should definitely pick it up. It deserves so much more hype than it's getting. So yeah, I guess that's all my thoughts on Dodgeball Academia, but now that I've beaten it, a huge void in my soul has opened and I need another awesome indie game to play. So let me know in the comments some games you've been playing that you think deserve more love and might make for a good video. Gotta say thanks to all the people supporting the channel, and if you're new here, thanks for stopping by and watching all the way to the end. I do game reviews, manga recommendations, and sometimes even movie analysis videos, so subscribe if you want to see any of that. Okay, wow, this is the end of the video, and I somehow managed to avoid referencing the Vince Vaughn Dodgeball movie the whole time. I guess you could say I dodged that one. Alright, you definitely hate me now, so I'll let you go. Have a good one, and I'll see you in the next video.